Genesis chapter 29, Jacob is continuing his journey to get to his uncle Laban's house so that he can find a wife for his future and that God can establish him and his own home. We'll pick up where we left off, verse 1. Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the open country with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob basically found a location where people would come to. He knew that if he was there, people would eventually come and that he could connect with them. This is what would take place. Then, in verse 4, Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they replied. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yes, we know him," they answered. Then Jacob asked them, "Is he well?" And they said, "Yes, he is. And here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep right now." "Well, what do you know? What are the chances?" Verse 7. "Look," he said, "the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to the pasture." "We can't," they replied. "Until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well, then we will water the sheep." While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. He wanted to do something that would be serving. He wanted to do an act of kindness. He was trying to sow some good seed because he wanted to live with this family. He wanted to find a wife with this family. He would eventually marry Rachel. We learned that Jacob then kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. When it says he kissed Rachel, it means like a term of endearment, like a kiss on a cheek, something cultural, like in the Middle Eastern area. This wasn't anything relational more than that. He wept aloud. He was just excited to have met his family and to finish his journey. It says that he had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah, so she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home, and there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." After Jacob had stayed with him a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." So basically, Laban says, "I like you here. I like having you around. I'm not going to kick you out. I want you to work for me. What are your wages going to be?" And Jacob says to him, and he talks to him about his daughters. It says Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. It says that Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. All right. That's the Bible's really nice way of saying that Leah wasn't very pretty and that Rachel was beautiful. It's the nicest way I've ever heard it put, with weak eyes, but that's what the Bible was basically saying. And Jacob was in love with Rachel. He was infatuated with her, and he said, "I'll work for you for 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It's better that I give her to you than some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel. Now this is so romantic, watch this. But they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. He was so committed to Rachel, he so desired Rachel, that he worked for Laban for years, and it was easy for him to work for him. Verse 21, then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to make love to her. I want to be with my wife. I want to have my own family." So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. So Laban tricks Jacob. He brings his older daughter instead of his younger daughter. You might be thinking, how in the world did he pull this off? And in some ways, it's kind of comically ironic because Jacob tricked Isaac and came and presented himself as another, so he sowed some bad seed. Now he's reaping it in the future, so there's a little comical irony to it. But I'm guessing, and this is total guess, I'm guessing the only way that he got tricked was that they drank way too much at the feast and at the party, and that Jacob probably didn't even know who he was or where he was when Laban pulled the old switcheroo. That's just my guess. Who knows? Verse 25, when morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you've done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It's not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, so do the honeymoon. Then I will give you the younger one also, but in return, you have to work for me another 7 years." What a trickster. I'm sure Jacob was frustrated. I'm sure that there was some tension that went on after this took place. Not only does Jacob have to work 7 more years. Now he's going to have 2 wives instead of the one wife that he wanted, and then they're both sisters, so I'm sure that's going to create some tension. I don't know how their customs and their cultures were at that time, and I know things are different now in the 2020s than they were way back then, but that being said, like, this is going to create problems in the future, and we're going to see those problems take place. It says, and Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. So he's got Rachel, he's got Leah, he likes Rachel more, he doesn't like Leah as much, there's tension that's taking place, but we begin to see that because of this tension, God sees what's going on and he begins to bless the womb of Leah. It says in verse 31, it begins to talk about Jacob's children. And this is significant because Jacob would have these 12 sons, and you begin to see the tribes of Israel beginning to take root. And there are 4 different moms. There's Rachel, there's Leah, and then the 2 servants that were with Rachel and Leah, because they were competing with each other, they would have their servants sleep with their husband Jacob so that they could claim more children on their side. It was getting a little crazy, I'm not going to lie to you, but we're going to go through it. It says, when the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben. For she said, it is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now. Now, culturally, normally, if you had multiple wives in those time and one provided you with a firstborn son, you would really love that firstborn son culturally, and you would have more of an affinity towards that wife. She was hoping that Jacob's love and affection would turn towards her because she was providing him the legacy in the generations to come that he so desired. Well, we see that that's not necessarily the case, and it says that she conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too. So she named him Simeon. Again she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. So his name was Levi. Okay, I'm going to stop here with Levi. Levi is significant because Levi would become the Levites, and the Levites were the tribe that was designated as the priest to the Lord. So there is something spiritually significant about Levi. Levi was a very significant tribe later on in the times of Israel. And then a very significant tribe would come next. Her 4th son, she conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, this time I will praise the Lord. So she named him Judah. Judah would be the lineage of David and would be where Christ would eventually come forth from. Moving forward, it says, then she stopped having children. It's interesting how it goes, and it'll go through in the next chapter. We'll cover it shortly. It'll go through all the different children that were born and all the different tribes that were born. But basically, the premise of the story, in a lot of ways, is to show us, 1, how Jacob ended up with 2 wives, Rachel and Leah, and 2, to show us how Jacob ended up with 4 mothers to his children, really something unhealthy and competitive. And 3, it shows us that Jacob reaped where he sowed. And it reminds me of the scripture in Galatians, I want to say it's chapter 6, verse 9. It says, be not deceived, for God will not be mocked, for whatever a man sows, he will reap. And whenever you sow good seed, you'll reap a good harvest. A lot of people think of consequences as a bad thing. That's not necessarily the case. Consequences can be good. When you do good things, you're going to reap a good harvest. But when you sow bad seed, you're going to reap a bad harvest. And Jacob sowed some bad seed by the way that he treated his father and the way that he treated his brother Esau and the way that he deceived. And we see that years later, he would reap that in kind from his uncle Laban, who was a deceiver as well. And this deceit, the first deceit that Jacob did fractured a family. The deceit that Laban did created tension in a family that would create fractures in the future. And really, if there's anything that these 2 stories teach us, is that lying's not good. Sometimes we think in life, my wife and I, we've joked about this. She made this comment to me. She was playful one time, and I'm not knocking on my wife. I love her, but she made this comment to me one time. She goes, well, it was an appropriate lie. And I'm like, baby, hold on, time out, baby. I love you. There's never an appropriate lie. Sometimes we think in a situation that if we tell a lie, things will go better, or if we can smooth over the situation, or we can tell someone, hear me, what they want to hear so that we can think that we're keeping peace in the situation. And even we can try to spiritually justify it. And we'll say, well, blessed are the peacemakers. I'm just keeping peace. Hold on. Lying is not a means to an end. There is never an appropriate situation to lie. Even small lies, even partial truths, mistruths. A lot of times we'll tell half the truth and lead someone to a conclusion that we know is not fully accurate. That is also a lie. And so we have to be careful that we don't allow lies to enter into our relationships, because as we see in the life of Jacob, as we saw in the life of Isaac, as we saw in the life of Abraham, all that lying ever did was create tension, fractures, and pain. Let's tell the truth. Let's do life God's way, and we'll be blessed because of it. Be blessed today.